Interesting stuff. Very interesting. I want to go down to its conclusions. The planned extraction of the LM by the CSM may not have been attempted, and the S-4B rocket could have continued to carry the lunar module to the moon orbit. Once in lunar orbit, the ground control may have tried to land the lunar module. This would have been an achievement on a par with the Soviets' lunar landings that were part of the lunar program. The Apollo 5 mission demonstrated that the lunar module could dismount the S-4B on its own and could go through pre-programmed, planned steps using a sequencer. Once it landed on the moon, the ground control just had to initiate an ascent, which would leave the spent descent stage on the lunar surface as a testament that the mission reached the moon. Sorry, shouldn't laugh. Conversely, the Apollo missions may have put space junk in the low Earth orbit, which by all accounts should not be there. Consider the 4 large lunar module protective panels which were jettisoned at the beginning of separation. These were photographed only during the Apollo 7 mission, because on that mission the panels were removed by the actuators, but otherwise remained with the S-4B. Failure of one panel to fully deploy motivated NASA to jettison them in subsequent Apollo missions. Now, in the Apollo 11 mission, the panels were not captured on film, even though images of much smaller and faster pieces of debris were. This strongly suggests that the panels were either removed from the footage when the Earth image was pasted in, or that they were ejected as the craft were repositioned to stage the STD. One such intact panel resembles the so-called Black Knight satellite, which would be much later photographed by the Space Shuttle crew. Now, that's something I've never seen before.
No.
Wow.
And yet NASA claims that that Black Knight satellite is nothing but a blanket that fell off of one of the objects that they had out there. Some cover that they had on some equipment, and it just, magically or mysteriously fell off.
Yep, that's right. And there's 27 separate references to this article. A very interesting article. Well found on that one, Robert.
When we were talking about that skip re-entry, and I go, geez, there was an article in here that caught my attention. I never read it before. Wow, skip re-entry? Oh, this kind of would be what we're talking about.
It is.
But look at all the references that he has here. These guys can't say that we don't ever post anything.
No, there's plenty of references. Even if the S-4B reached the moon, the CSM did not, but remained in low Earth orbit. That's a very good point. Excellent point. And because nobody was looking for the CSM in low Earth orbit, nobody ever saw it there.
Then you have a brand new problem.
What's that?
Because the LEM did not have enough fuel to be able to do a trans-lunar injection. The CSM was claimed to have that kind of fuel. And then, of course, if you go to today, where you need like 15 rockets up there to provide enough fuel to do this stuff, now we're back to where the reality and fantasy comes into play, even with this scenario. That's a suggestion he's making, but it couldn't possibly have happened. Does not have the fuel to do it. Does not have the guidance system in that vehicle to travel like that. And that's both notable. There's 2 notable things right there on the thing. And then you got to come back to how loud is a Saturn V rocket at takeoff. These guys were talking at 70 decibels. How do you put the insulation into that craft to get it down to 70 decibels?
But when they were building the LEM, we can see it. There's no insulation in those walls that they're talking about.
If you reduce the sound of a Saturn V rocket by 75%, if that's what you've reduced it down to inside the craft, it's still loud enough to kill you. That's what people need to understand. You need to get it down to under 1%. And then it's just like being at a very loud concert inside that vehicle. You have to get it down that far. Like I said, you reduce it by 75%, you're still at 185 decibels. It'll liquefy your body. And then you got that pogo effect that's running like an ultrasonic cleaner. It is vibrating that craft at 180,000 times per second, pulling 10 Gs in each direction. That again will liquefy your body. Now, how do you just simply get to low Earth orbit with that craft? But if you saw a Saturn V rocket successfully launched every time, did not blow up on the launch pad, didn't do anything else. If you take enough fuel to get it up out of sight, you can turn down the energy that those engines are running out to so that they're running at a safe level, because you no longer have a payload. You're not going to have all of that payload in there. The only thing you're going to have that's going to be mounted there is the command module, because it is part of a Saturn V rocket. That's what you're going to be looking at. You don't need environmental controls because there's going to be nobody in there. There's no fuel for all of the other stuff that's supposed to be landing on the moon. Now you have a basically empty vehicle with nothing more than the one piece that's sitting there. You don't need to fuel it up as much. It's going to be a lighter craft. You can turn the engines down doing that. And it's still going to accelerate at the rate you want to appear to be in a very safe manner. Yeah. Then, of course, what do we have today? We've got people talking about a Saturn V rocket is only lifting 45 tons. And that's in today's world. You listen to Elon Musk. Oh, it lifts 45 tons. We're lifting 50. That's what his claim is, right? Or we're attempting to lift 50.
Yeah, they haven't done it yet.
But Apollo was 140 tons.
Well, that's what we're told it was, if they were actually going to do it with humans.
Yeah. We already watched Musk lifting off an empty vehicle, and he put so much fuel in it that it just sat on the launch pad until it lightened up on the fuel before it could even take off without a payload, just because he's using methane, and the vehicle, to get that much more energy out of it, is just using that much more fuel with that methane. So they can't even carry enough fuel to get to space. I mean, how far backwards do you have to go? You're using the same type of equipment. You're using liquid fuel rockets, and you keep repeating it over and over again and expecting a different result.
Yeah, that's a sign of madness.
I guess there's a lot of madness because they're funding this because they just want to see it blow up. I mean, there's more failures there. People don't understand. Musk has been around for, 20, 22 years now. And what has he achieved? Apollo started, they had to put the buildings up. They had to design everything from scratch. They had no previous record of events to go on. Everything was brand new. Everything had to be tested, everything else. What is it, 6.5 years and they're on the moon?
Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Right? 10 years. Orion is still looking at the heat shields from 2014 when they were so badly damaged and they can't fit. That's 10 years later. That's with our modern computerized technology, designs and testing facilities that are already there to deal with this stuff. And 10 years later, and they still can't produce a heat shield.
Good point. Very good point.
And then we get to the spacesuits.
Oh,
why are they throwing these out? Use the Apollo ones. They worked.
We're told.
Okay. And they've completely restored them. They should work. Grab Neil's suit, jump in Sandusky, crank her down to -6.
Yeah.
That's only 130 miles up. That suit, even though it's old and it's been reconditioned, should be able to handle that little bit of vacuum, because that's way less than what's on the moon. Just jump in that chamber.
They won't.
Read documents on what they claim. Oh, you can live for 90 minutes in space without a spacesuit. You just blow up a little bit and you come back down to normal. All nonsense, right? I have documents. I have the PDF files. I have difficulty reading them because testing of dogs in a vacuum running 70,000 feet, they just pull the valve on it and put them in a vacuum. It's like 1.7 seconds, they're dead. That's 70,000 feet. Yeah, and then, of course, you got them doing spacewalks with a big hole in their suit, and they get a little red spot on their hand. Bullshit. I mean, they're producing so much fantasy in their capabilities out there. People have difficulty deciding on what is real and what isn't real. And I'm sure that article on Hollis, he's worked out all of the calculations, but it could be all done by a simulator, just because it appears to be that in a 70 millimeter camera. They probably did the math to work it out and say, hey, this looks like we're 120 miles off the surface. In the camera view, take the pictures. Because if they're actually up there and the radiation is bothering those cameras, the film's going to fog over.
That's what I said in this video. You watch what's going to happen when they finally do send humans to the moon. So let's say Artemis 3 makes it there. Well, it's not going to make it there. We already know that. It's not going to make it there for at least another 5 years, if at all. So let's just say they do make it there. Well, they're going to have to come up with some excuse about Apollo and why they didn't do this and do that, or didn't do this or do that. But they're going to say this, I'll guarantee you. Oh, well, you see, what happened was the radiation really did ruin all the film that we sent up there, so we had to go and redo it all in various studios, but we really did go, and here's the evidence for it. And then they're going to show all this stuff. Of course, they're going to show a flag, and the flag won't be disintegrated. The flag will still be there along with all the other stuff. Oh, but wait a minute. We can't go near it because it's a heritage site now, which means they can't fly over it. It's a heritage site, which means they cannot take any photographs of it. Well, I don't understand this, because if the LRO that supposedly took pictures of all these Apollo landing sites, and they claim it's a heritage site, then how could they take photographs of it when they themselves are off limits? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Doesn't make sense at all.
I think if we ever actually get to the lunar surface with any vehicle, they're going to find that that surface is quite a bit different than has been shown in the past. That ultra fine dust that is highly charged, photoelectric charge every time the sun hits it, is going to cover everything. It's just going to be like a blanket of snow. And I don't care whether it's an inch thick or 100 feet thick. And it's probably more in the 100 feet thick. What they're showing is a gravel pit by comparison, right? Because it's all done in shotcrete, and that's what they have to repeat that in all of the thing. And I don't care whether it's China or Japan or anything else. They reproduce that same images. The rocks look the same.
Yeah, but we're back to dust again. So when the sun hits the dust or the sun hits the regolith, it's going to levitate. Well, we know that. We can see it in some of these Apollo 11 images. So when the sun goes down and there's darkness, then it falls back to the ground. So what my problem is why do we see all these bare rocks everywhere? They should be covered in something. I mean, there should be some dust on them, but we don't see that. And we don't even see that with the Chinese photographs.
Right. If you took a probe and you landed on the surface in the daytime, that dust is going to come up, and it's going to stay up until the sun goes down. It's not coming back down. The lightest particles are already levitating when you're landing. You're going to push up heavier particles on there, and even if it's only a foot thick, you won't be able to see anything, whatever cameras you have on that vehicle that you're landing there with. We don't see any of that stuff in their simulation because they're afraid to change what they previously showed 50 years ago. You have to keep reproducing that. And that's the point. When they finally do get actually a vehicle on that surface, they'll be able to show us what it really looks like.
Will they? Really?
We'll be long dead. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Oh, talking of dust and rising, you know that film of the jump salute? I think it's Apollo 16. The astronaut jumps up about a foot, saluting the flag. And if you look at his feet, you see the dust falls much faster than he does. Now, there's a comparison there with a beach volleyball player who jumps up and the sand on his feet comes up as well. And as he goes down, so the sand goes down at the same time, which demonstrates that gravity attracts everything equally. But on the moon, it doesn't, because it shows clearly that what is recorded by the Apollo films, allegedly on the moon, is not what really happens. And that is the only film that I've ever seen where you got the direct comparison between the beach volleyball player and the astronaut, and showing the sand going down and then the astronaut coming after it. And that demonstrates that it was filmed here on Earth, because they couldn't put sand on bits of string.
Yeah. You see, the best way that NASA has to wait another 40 or 50 years, and then they'll say, oh, all of our files are no good. We can't show them to you on the internet because the internet has been upgraded and won't show a JPEG.
Yeah.
Or an MP4 file or any video file or whatever. They're going to say, oh, that's old technology. We can't use it, so we can't show it to you anymore. So we threw them all in the garbage because we can't use them anymore. Just like those tapes that are in the McDonald's. They had machines to play it. And they said, well, we needed to clean the machines first before we could play the tape. And then, well, we took them apart and couldn't get them back together, so we just threw them out. That's what they're going to do with all their files that they have on board here And of course, eventually they're going to be moving that equipment out of the museums as well. Like they'll still have images of them, but they won't have the physical pieces of them.
But the problem is that you've got all these films on your computer. They can't remove those.
No, and they have a problem with hardback books, magazines, everything else that are still in existence out there, right? That's like NASA paid Canada to upgrade our Encyclopedia Britannica and our school books. I was looking at one of my granddaughter's stuff, I think it was grade 8 or 9 or whatever, and it was just man landed on the moon, and here's just a sketch of Neil Armstrong going, here's Neil and Buzz, and just their names, and that was it. And the date that they landed, that's all that was on there. That's part of history in her history book. And I'm going, where the hell are the color photographs that were in the books that were printed previously? Oh, well, they're being replaced. Any of the information or articles that were in those to teach the students is no longer available. And NASA made that happen.
Yeah, that was the scene in the film Interstellar. Remember that one? Well, they've been replaced.
Yeah, that's not a fantasy. That's reality.
Oh, I know. Yeah, that's why it's so important that you've got the records on your computer. It's very valuable.
Yeah, and then they'll turn around and they'll just call those are like, I did all that work and made them fraudulent. Those are just fraudulent documents. They mean nothing.
They can say what they like, but I've still got my bit of moon rock.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that thing might be worth actually money because it's probably as close to a moon rock as you can get. Those are the guys operating the Far Ultra camera, spending all that time and all of that conversation setting up to get those incredible pictures that they have, right? Imagine how many times they would have to depressurize the lens to go out and change it.
But they aren't very good pictures anyway.
Oh, no, they come in a raw format, and then you have to have another special program to put them back together to even see them. And you have to pay, I forget how much money it is, you have to pay to get those ones. The few that they've listed, at least the PDF file, has the listing of all of the positions that this thing was to be set in. Everything in space that they were taking pictures of, and the exposure time of each of those images. Well, when they start the next one, and if you see them in sequence, they're right one after the other. There has to be a guy there. The guy has to be there operating. This is a 100% manual camera. He has to turn the dial as they're rotating to keep it in line. I don't know how slow he has to do the dial because there's no motors on this thing, right? He'd be lucky to make it level.
And he's using photographic film as well.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of slides they were actually using in that one because each one's an individual file, right? So it must be in the big old-fashioned slide style.
Yeah, it'd probably be 5x4 inch slide because that's the standard procedure. I haven't seen the details of the camera. It doesn't really matter what the details are, but if they were using photographic film in those plates, as far as I know, there are about 30 pictures taken by that camera, 26 to 30. I forget the exact number, but somewhere around there.
And I think if you look at the transcript, there's only, I think, 3 instances where they actually attend the camera in the transcript.
But the transcript is supposed to record everything that is said when they were on the lunar surface, allegedly. But it doesn't. It appears to be a film script to match what NASA want us to believe.
If you take 30 or 35 pictures with the thing, and they're 20 to 30 minutes exposure time each one, and then have to be completely reset that camera for the next image, you need to have somebody there that entire length of time. You can't be out on a rover, you can't be anywhere else, you can't be inside the LEM sleeping, and you're certainly not going to come out every 30 minutes out of the LEM and depressurize it. That means 2 guys have to be suited up every time and then repressurized every time. So that's not happening. Okay. And when they're kilometers away on their little excursions on the thing, they're not back at that thing, so you need to have another guy. And there must have been another guy there because they do have the pictures.
Well, pictures are quite easy to produce. I mean, we've seen that with the thousands of pictures they've taken allegedly on the lunar surface.
Right. And he's doing it independently by himself because he didn't even need to talk to Houston.
No, he didn't talk to Houston, didn't talk to his mates.
No. Maybe he was talking to the guy in the CSM orbiting because they no transcript to him for 3 days either. Simulation errors that they did.
Yeah.
Forgetting about one person who is part of a team because they're so focused on that, getting those ground shots and trying to make it look like they were on the lunar surface. They completely forgot about the guy in the CSM, and they did it 6 times.
Yeah, that's true. It's a good point.
And I mean, the guy's probably at the grotto.
Yeah.
You know, he's got a T-38. He's offset. He doesn't need to be on set for anything. He just fly in, see Hugh, hang out at the grotto. I mean, look at Apollo 12. I mean, they came back and they got all the Playboy Bunny pictures there. I'm sure these guys were hanging out with these girls at the grotto to include them in the cuff checklist for Apollo 12. And of course, Buzz Aldrin was always classified as a ladies' man, right up even till today, getting remarried in the 90s when he's in his 90s, right? Of course, he's going to be there. Those guys were more famous than any of the movie stars. Yeah. And where did those guys go? Well, they went to see Hugh Hefner. These guys would have been there. They get a star in the Walk of Fame. Of course they'd be there. Okay, I could see Neil going, nope, got to go see the wife. He's a pretty straight-laced kind of guy, but the rest of them weren't.
Okay, I'm going to show you something here. Watch the sand on this guy's feet. Look at it, it comes back down again. See, it goes up and then it comes back down. Thunk. Yep. Watch the astronaut now.
It goes up and then the sand all disappears.
The astronaut's got a little more hang time from that wire that he's on.
But it's certainly coming down a lot faster.
Yeah, well, he's coming down in the exact same spot. Watch his feet.
But the point is, look at how fast the sand's falling on him compared to this.
Right
compared to this guy, look at how this hangs, though.
That guy kicked a little bit more sand up there than the astronaut did. Kicked it a little higher off the top of his foot. Like all the other guys that are playing there, that sand is dropping right back down quite quickly.
Yeah, it does.
And so is it underneath the astronaut. It's just dropping right away. Look at that go.
Yeah, straight down.
It's just gone. And it's under nice bright sunlight. Any fine dust there would just hang with that photoelectric charge, wouldn't it? It'd be there for a week. It's levitating. It's not coming back down. So it's just going to hang right there. And that's the part of the simulation that they could not do.
And they had to show that he was on the surface and jumping up on the surface. There are also some quite interesting pictures of training where the astronaut is walking along with a great rig on him, accompanied by a vehicle going along beside him, presumably taking 5/6 of his weight off because he was having real trouble keeping his balance. It's as if he was walking on ice.
Now I've got them both going at the same speed. This is to be fair. Now I've got him in 1/6 gravity here. Watch how fast that bloody sand falls. Look at how this hangs. This hangs like it's supposed to. This just goes thunk.
Yeah, well, it should stay up.
Yeah, it's exactly timed right on the button. So that's really strange.
I think you showed it in your last film. The panoramas that were taken on most of the Apollo missions. And there's one which shows a camera panning around. Now, obviously a camera can pan through 360 degrees, but what size stage set would be required for that to occur?
Well, for forced perspective, that camera actually, no, it didn't. It only went around from here to here. Yeah, it was only 180 degrees. They didn't go all the way around.
Was that the one with the rock and then the shadow of the rock is up on the backdrop?
No, that's the one where it goes like this.
The shadow of the rocks are opposite as it pans across.
Yeah, and that's that new one.
Yeah, lights coming in from both sides.
Yeah.
So the shadows coming this way and the shadows are coming that way off the rocks as it pans around like that.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, and then you get to the very end and the astronaut shadows are so long that they go from one end all the way to the other.
Right.
But when you look at the other side, there's just short little shadows and they get longer and longer and the shadows switch and then they get longer and longer. Right?
Yeah.
Apollo 16, there are shots or the light source is vertical. And Apollo 17 is quite a bit like that as well. It's got huge degree angles on it. But Apollo 16, they're so obvious, especially around the LEM. The first shots of the LEM with the long shadow, and then they're absolutely vertical. Be standing right up against the ladder, which is on the shady side, and you're going to be in the sun because it's that vertical. absolutely ridiculous.
Dave Mc Keegan has managed to put up a couple of more videos tearing apart Bart Sibrel's appearance on Rogan, and also a recent one about radiation, which I watched last night. Interesting stuff he comes up with. But of course, being a supporter of NASA and determined to believe that everything NASA says is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God, he'll go along with it, which is fine.
That's interesting because NASA does not release the actual data on the radiation. How can anybody argue in favor of them if they're not getting the actual release of it? And of course, we have mentioned that a number of times, that they're not giving the data. What's outside the craft is the number that you need. You have to start with that outside number, and they don't have any detectors on the outside. And the ones that they did, even inside the craft, all burnt up.
How do we know that they burned up?
They claimed that for Orion in 2014. The only surviving detectors on board of the 140 sensors on board that craft were the battery-operated radiation detectors that were put inside the craft, inside lead cabinets, inside of water and sand, and took a snapshot once a minute. The rest of the sensors were gone. The cameras were gone at 500 miles, and that's documented.
It's interesting that it's very easy to state that geocentric satellites can operate in the outer Van Allen belts, which they do, but they are protected. And it's quite easy to protect monitors and satellites from radiation. It's well known. There's no problem with that at all. The difference is protecting humans, you know, us delicate little creatures that tend to get a bit upset if we spend too long out in the sun. So the idea that you can compare a satellite to a human without producing the evidence is rather remarkable and doesn't really stack up. You know, it's very easy to say that NASA's story stands up because of this and that and the other. But there's an equal amount of evidence to show that NASA's story does not stack up because of this, that, and the other. And it's a matter of debating and to determine who is correct. As Scott says, unless you have the actual readings taken from the craft, you can't make a determination about it. You can only guess at it. Maybe that's all we're doing. We're guessing at it because we make determinations based on the evidence available. But it's interesting that nobody, to my knowledge, nobody except us has discussed vacuum effects in space. I mean, we've done quite a few films about it. Robert's edited it extremely well because it shows that vacuum has an effect in space, not just on humans, but on equipment, specifically photographic film. Now, nobody's ever, except for us, I'm not aware of anybody else who's ever mentioned that as a problem. They gloss over it and say, well, the cameras were protected because they were silver coated. Oh, so what? That only protects them from heat. It doesn't protect them very well from heat. So the idea that you can have these protections built in is just nonsense. It doesn't add up. And when you say, well, tell me about outgassing, I don't know what you're talking about.
Did you see? Now, in that video, these guys are saying that, oh, it's just about impossible to take a LEM and, do it. The LEM is in the Earth's atmosphere, and there's a big blue Earth behind it in Apollo 9. Well, that's amazing because I managed to take that Earth, that big blue Earth that's in the background, and all the blue reflecting off the LEM, tone it down, and then put a mask around it. Now I just got rid of the Earth. And then I took the LEM that's coming up and rotating, and I dropped it into the Apollo 12 footage. So there's no blackness of space anywhere there. It's all blue, the whole thing. So if I can do that, you know how easy that was to do with an optical printer? All you have to do is take that wheel on the optical wheel and just turn it to horizontal polarization, and you can kiss the blue goodbye. The wavelengths, it goes by taking the wavelengths out. And yet, you'll still see the LEM. It still will look nice and silver and polished. That's what I did. It took me 5 minutes to do it. And that footage is from the Apollo 9. And that's why I put it there. I says, this footage is from the Apollo 9. Big, huge words up there. And they still don't get it. I didn't need a black sky for that.
And should we just mention Lookout Mountain Laboratories at this point?
Yes, and I have that in there too. You see the lady making the templates and cutting up the templates and then handing them over to the other laboratory technician. I had all that in there.
Yeah, that's what shows what was going on. That was a US Air Force Base film laboratory, very well equipped, unlimited funding. Of course they could do it.